So good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this. Welcome to this webinar on getting a better return on investment from Salesforce. My name is Ian Gotts. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Elements. As with all webinars, this will be recorded and you'll be sent the recording and also the deck. And at the end of the presentation, there will be a series of takeaways and some resources which will be useful to you. So Salesforce is a really powerful platform. Some may say it's expensive, but it's only expensive if you don't get the benefits from it. So we're all about how do we get a better return on investment from the platform. Clearly, it's even more important as we drive towards a more agile business. Digital transformation is accelerating the changes we need to make to Salesforce. And therefore, it can be extremely valuable because obviously all our customer data is inside Salesforce. And Salesforce is at the heart of digital transformation, which, as you'll see there, is being accelerated. COVID has forced everybody online, and those companies who master the digital experience are those who are going to come out the winners. But what that also means is that the businesses are having to change very quickly, which means they need to be very agile. If Salesforce is a supporting platform, then we need to make changes to that quickly, and we need to make changes to that with confidence we're not going to break anything. So we can increase the ROI of Salesforce by A, making sure more people use it, B, make sure they're using it correctly, and C, we can change it when it needs to be changed, and therefore we're driving that the business better, and it's giving that business agility. Obviously, the issue there is that the complexity can kill that agility and ROI. So we've created 3 golden rules of Salesforce ROI. The first is, let's make sure we build the apps that people genuinely need, not the ones they thought they wanted. So let's build them first time and get them right first time. There's a concept in Salesforce testing, in software testing called shift left. And what that means is, let's try and catch the issues earlier in the cycle. So let's take that principle and extend it even further and say, let's catch the issues, the conflicts, the challenges, let's catch them in analysis. And now I know as humans, we all want to rush to go and build something. We want to get to the result, which could be an app or a change to Salesforce. But we need to resist that. We need to make sure we do a lot more of that upfront analysis before we start building. And the benefits are huge. As I said there, 80% of wasted work and reduced rework. If we can catch things in design, way cheaper to make a change then than to catch it in production. So that whole idea of shift left is really valuable. The other thing is the act of doing the business analysis, the process mapping, the questioning how the business operates can drive out business process improvements. And we're seeing up to 25% of business of savings just from those activities. You don't have to make any changes to Salesforce. This is purely about driving a better understanding about how the business operates, driving out some quick wins. So that's the first area. The second area is about how do we accelerate the pace of change inside Salesforce. And you can't do that unless you have a good visibility about what's in Salesforce, the impact analysis, what will break if we make changes. And again, done properly, we found you can reduce the analysis effort by up to 50%. The second thing is, if you can accelerate that release, so you're releasing daily rather than weekly or monthly, that has a massive impact on the ROI. Some research done by 10K advisors showed that those companies who had the faster release cycles had the highest return on investment. Now, clearly, the faster you go, the more chance there is of breaking the org and obviously the cost associated with that, which is why this better visibility is far more important. Somebody said you can either go really fast, break things, come back and do them again, or you can go slowly and make sure you don't break things. With better visibility of what's in the org, you get the best of both worlds, fast and not breaking things. And then the third area is for return on investment is documentation. And rarely do you find the word documentation and return on investment in the same sentence. But in this case, it actually is true. Making sure that you've documented not just what you've built, but why you've built it means that the next time you do any changes there, the amount of impact analysis is massively reduced. At the same time, you can start to reduce technical debt. Now, before you switch off and go, I'm not interested in documentation, There are 4 ways you create documentation, and 3 of those are really easy and are done for you. So don't think of this as a massive paperwork or documentation exercise. Actually, when we get to that section, you'll see that there's a lot of this stuff gets done for you automatically. So let's pick off that first area, thinking about building the right apps first time. And if I think about the fairly simple implementation cycle that you'll all recognize, you're capturing feedback, you're capturing some requirements as business outcomes. I want to be able to do something. I want this business benefit. We then try and break that down into some deliverable items, either user stories that we're going to go and build, the changes we're going to make to Salesforce. And we're going to do that by mapping the processes to validate the requirements. We're going to be looking at the changes to Salesforce, and then we're building some user stories. Then we'll take those user stories, maybe push them into Jira or Agile Accelerator or whatever you use for managing them. Then we're into build, and then we're releasing them. And the principle of shift left is let's spend more time up front here making sure we're building the right thing, we're building it the correct way, we're making sure that it's architected correctly before we find the changes back, the issues here. So conflict resolution at this stage is way cheaper than conflict resolution and fixing it either in build or worse when it's actually released. So a really simple concept, relatively easy to do. Let me show you how some of this works in practice. So here I am in a Salesforce screen. The principles that I want to talk about, you don't have to use Elements. I'm obviously going to use Elements as the example, but what I want to drive home is the principles of this shift left, the principles of better analysis. So here we are in Salesforce. You'll all recognize that. We happen to have a process diagram embedded within a page layout. But what's important here is capturing feedback. And you can see that the little help icon's been turned purple, and I can start to leave feedback. And you can see that we've talked about tracking vaccinations for staff members. For our little example, we're going, but what about guests? We should be tracking them because they're a risk. And I'll do a +1 because I agree with that. So let's see where that's gone. So inside Elements, we have basically taken the spreadsheets that you would normally use and turn them into applications. So here are the list of feedback. And if I do a quick refresh on that, there is that discussion. That's the feedback. We've got it in one place. It's linked to the object, so I don't have to create those links. And the most natural thing for there would be to create a requirement. And I can see we already have a requirement here, which is being assessed. So we've already agreed to track vaccinations. So let's just go back and add to that feedback and say it's being assessed. So at least the end users in the application now understand what's happening. So we look at this requirement over here. We've agreed to track vaccinations. We can add some notes. We can see the feedback that's come in here. But also we can start to think about the user stories that maybe need to be. So these are the things which need to be changed inside Salesforce. So we've got our spreadsheet of feedback. We're now looking essentially as the equivalent of a spreadsheet of requirements, but you can see the linkages starting to come together. Now, I don't want to rush straight into extending survey forms and changing a managed package until I really understand the implications of this requirement. So I need to be thinking about the process around how we track vaccinations for guests. So here is our process for how we track guests. It happens to be part of a higher level picture about the whole of how we manage work.com. So we've got how we manage employee wellness. There's a drill down on that. How we get employees safely back to work. But we were in visitor management. So if I click on that, let's go down to the whole area of how we manage visitors, because we wanted to track the vaccination status of guests. And we're in the published version here. But if I go into the draft version, because I want to go make some changes. Again, none of this is rocket science. All of this is very achievable for people to do. Oh, and I can see that someone's already started doing some work here. So let me just go into edit mode. And I can see we're talking about when we pre-register a guest, we need to check their vaccination record. So does that mean we need to do a vaccination? Do we need to do a wellness check? Do we just need to check that they've got a valid vaccination? And if I drill down or roll over that, I can see that we're simply looking at their vaccination status, looking at the paperwork, or looking on an app. And you can see I've attached some things already. So there's an attachment there, and I can see that we've already got that requirement attached. So at least we've got some traceability. And those two user stories, oh no, there are 3 user stories now linked, a vaccination tracker. So now we are connecting, those requirements are now connected to the process maps, and they are now connected to some user stories. So we're building up a picture here without having made any changes so far, but at least we're starting to understand the implications of those changes. And I could drill down or add some more processes or whatever I need to go and do, add some links. And this is the area where I'm engaging the end users about what it is they need to be done before we start building. This is really engaging, by the way, for end users. This is not the same as walking around interviewing them, writing them interview notes. You've got them there, they're looking at the same screen, you're having a conversation with them going, okay, well, what happens next? Have you got any notes? Oh yeah, why don't I go and attach some documentation? You've already got, I know, a photograph of what a valid vaccination status looks like. Or maybe there's some research about what guest vaccinations look like. So very easy to start collecting the right information in one place. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the point is we've now attached to this some user stories. And of course, those user stories we'd like to go and release in one release. So if I go across to our release management side, you can now see that we have a list of user stories that are all going into that release. So there is the one about the guest app. You can see that it's got, so we've suggested a change to one metadata item called the guest event object. And we've got 2, well, it looks like these are proposed. Okay, so these are 2 new metadata items, a vaccination appointment and a vaccination object. So immediately I've got some alarm bells ringing here because we think this is ready for release. I'm not sure we've done enough analysis yet, and we've got 2 objects here which are both proposed. They haven't even been built inside Salesforce. At the same time, you can see that there's another user story where we're suggesting that someone's doing guest tracking. So we want to track guests using that same object and changing that same object in the managed package. So this idea of pulling together all the user stories and the related metadata into one view, which is the release, way ahead of actually doing any build. We're not in change sets here, we're not in Capado, we're actually at the early stages. We're doing the conflict resolution right here, starting to identify that there may be some challenges, that there may be some conflicts here. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you start to get the principle that we are this aggregated view of requirements linked to user stories, linked to metadata, linked to process diagrams, all bundled up in a release, suddenly gives us a lot more power to understand A, what we're meant to be building, and then be clear that we're building the right things, eliminate any conflict resolution, and suddenly we can accelerate that release. Now, this is not intended to be an Elements demo. I'm trying to draw out some principles. So let's go back and understand the benefits we've just seen from that. Firstly, the mapping the processes out streamlines those business operations, gets everybody on the same page, could even identify some quick wins. The act of going into that process map and looking at the guest process, I may have been able to streamline it or improve it. The other point about that is documenting those processes may be very relevant if you are highly regulated. So I think about vaccines and the liabilities of having guests on site who haven't gone through a valid vaccination status. The ability to surface that process diagram with all the attached training material inside the Salesforce app where you're registering the guests, suddenly we are mitigating or reducing some of our compliance risk. The second thing we're finding is we're eliminating rework in the build, test, and implementation phases. If we'd gone ahead and started making multiple changes to that managed package before we'd really done the analysis, there'll be a ton of rework. There'll be a ton of, so we would have wasted time on testing, build, testing, implementation, training, and also we would have lost the trust of the users because the changes we're making there, that we're then going to make yet more changes, yet more changes, yet more changes. So that goes to the next point, which is we're increasing the adoption by building the apps that the users really need. we're not building a whole, in this case, we weren't building a whole way of doing vaccinations for guests. We're simply validating whether their vaccination certificate on their app or on a piece of paper is valid. So instead of us building a whole vaccination app, all we're doing is tracking. So again, we built what the users need, not what they thought they wanted. And the last thing is, if you've got multiple spreadsheets that are all disconnected, there's a ton of rework from, I took a user story out of here, I then re-entered it into Jira. I took it out of that, I then stuck it into Capado. I took it out of that and then built user acceptance testing. A lot of this information already exists, and the moment we connect it, suddenly we're getting the power of all that documentation getting reused. Here are some examples, some real life examples from customers of the power of doing that analysis up front. The primary success of how-to, which was the name of their process content, is mass adoption. But simply it's about helping the right people do the right things at the right time. An area here called JP Morgan. If we'd had our processes up to date when we started the restructure, we could have done it in half the time. Again, that really talks back to the power of getting things written down, particularly in a where we're changing quickly with digital disruption, digital transformation. And here's an example from Chevron. A process model helps articulate and pinpoint the shortcomings in ways that are simply not possible when relying on language alone. We hear a lot about sort of senior people who do sort of air process mapping. They go, oh, this happens, and then that happens, and then we do this. Getting it written down and getting it really crisp, which is, okay, what is the handoff? What exactly is that makes a huge difference. And one of the resources at the end of this is a link to a business process mapping course that Salesforce has created, which is on the Partner Learning Camp. If you're not a partner, then there's also a link there to the highlights of that training course. So what I said is, let's have a look at how we improve the visibility of the changes to Salesforce. So let's go and look at that in practice, and we'll come back and then see how those benefits manifest themselves. So we saw here in this release, we've got these user stories, and we can start to see all the metadata items that are linked. And we can see 3 vaccination objects. So the question is, where are they coming from? Where's that information stored? So we have a metadata dictionary where we pull all the metadata out of an org, and you can see at the top level, it lists all the Apex classes, the number of managed packages, reports, and so on. Clearly, this is a demo org because the numbers are far smaller than maybe in your org. It takes about 2 minutes to set up, about an hour or 2 to do the synchronization and do all the analysis. But then you've got a metadata dictionary against which you can now see the analysis. So if we go back down to, where was it, that employee object. There's the employee object. I can start to see how many approval processes, how many custom fields, how many workflows, records by record type, an understanding about field impact, how many fields are well populated, how many fields are well used, how many are poorly used. We can also look at it, every single field and percentage population. So we can start to see all those fields that, again, were added but which were never used. So we're giving you some insights here which are very quick to get, but then you can also see where it is linked back to user stories. So the fact you're linking a user story to a metadata item means we're building up a history here of the changes that have happened and also why. If I roll over any of these, I can start to see more information. If I click there, it will open up that particular user story. The other thing we can do is we can see the linkages between the different metadata items. So I go down a little bit further. In fact, let me take you into a different example, which I know a little bit better. Here is a custom object called project. If I go down a little bit further down to the field level, budget, now I can start to see everything about the budget, what type of field, if it had pick lists. In this metadata dictionary, we have the opportunity for every single item to be able to spot optimization items. So we can start to do the cleanup. As we're walking away around going, oh, yeah, we should do something about that. here's the place that you add it. But what I want to do is show you this, which is the dependency analysis. I'm about to go make a change to this particular field. I can see that it's used in 2 record types, but it's not used at all in those record types. But look, I can see that it's used in 1 formula field, currency calc. I can see the calculation there. I can see it's used in 4 page layouts, used in 4 reports. It's used in 2 validation rules. And if there's a little icon on the right hand side, that means I can click on there, I can open up Inside Setup on that particular item. So that's the first level. But what I really want to know is the second level. I want multiple levels. So what are the implications of making a change to this particular metadata item? And maybe what else do I need to include in my user story in that manifest? So there's my field budget, tells me all about it. But I can see that it's actually the dependency is coming out of that custom field. Oh, wow, okay. And that custom field is used in those layouts. So I can click on any one of these, and also that field's in that report, and it feeds those 2 dashboards. So instantly, I can see from one metadata item, I'm making a change to that. What else might I need to include in that user story, in the manifest, in the changes I'm going to make into Salesforce? I make a change to this field, I don't realize it's feeding a report and it's feeding some dashboards, and suddenly those dashboards are now out of date, or they're giving incorrect information, and we're now driving the business in the wrong direction. And it may take weeks, maybe even months to discover that, and the cost of the business is enormous. So this ability very quickly to understand what's in the org, understand the implications of the changes, understand which user stories are touching it, which requirements are touching it. Is there documentation here that we could add as we're going along? And I'll talk about documentation in the next section. But all of this is in one place. If I click there, it will open it up inside Setup in the right panel. But I've got an example here. There we go. There's the employee student object, and there's the right panel. There's the Elements right panel, pops in there. Everything I've just shown you appears in the right panel. So you don't need to be in Elements, you can be inside Setup. But this is the level of power and analysis you need if you're genuinely going to manage a complex org. So what are the benefits of doing this? First of all, you can accelerate DevOps whilst reducing risk. So there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that you can go faster because you're not having to do as much analysis. The analysis takes less time. But secondly, you can understand the risk of a release. I can look at the user stories, I can look at the metadata items, and I can say, okay, this, based on the complexity I can see here, is high risk. I need to make sure I do take it through all the sandboxes. I need to do quite a lot of extensive testing. I need to do regression testing. Oh, hang on. This release here, based on the user stories and the metadata items, is low risk. That means I can take a fast track route to getting it into production, confident that I'm not going to break the org. And that means that you can then have different paths. You can have a fast path and a slower path, so that you can force changes into production more quickly, the business get the benefits more quickly. And the reason we can do that is we've massively reduced the org analysis time. That dependency tree I showed you uses the dependency API, the metadata API, and a bunch of custom code we've built. Doing that manually would not just be difficult, it wouldn't take ages, it would be impossible. The relationships that you need to go and work your way through to find all those connections. It's fields connected to field sets, connected to reports, dashboards, validation rules. All of those metadata items are linked. And you'd have to follow all those paths. And obviously, the moment you make a change, that picture is instantly out of date. For us, we're obviously analyzing it every night. So the real benefit there is you understand the impact of proposed changes and avoid breaking the org. Again, back to our shift left earlier in the conversation, you're seeing the impact of those changes before you start touching the code, before you start making changes to any of the metadata items, whether it's through clicks or code. The impact should be there should be fewer release rollbacks. We shouldn't be releasing and then having to roll back, or release and then suddenly issue a patch because we've broken something. And all the rework that's associated with that, all the pain and angst that goes with, wow, we've broken it, we've got 100 in the team, 100 people in the sales team who can't access an opportunity object because the validation rule is now not firing, or a flow's firing incorrectly. And finally, as I said, as you're working your way around the org, you can start to spot technical debt. That's obviously a technical debt is what kills the agility of an org. The ability to, as you bump into things, go, okay, yeah, we should be changing that, make a difference to that. That visibility means you also can help re-architect as you're working your way through, as you're making changes. We're getting a number of customers we're talking to who were considering simply throwing away the org and starting again. With this level of visibility, they can now unpick it rather than throwing away 10, 12 years worth of investment. So the last of the golden rules is about documentation. So before you all disappear, stop. There are 4 ways to create documentation, 3 of them, and most of the work has been done for you. It's only number 4 where you have some effort. So the first level of first piece of documentation is automated. You've just seen, I've just shown you the org model. We're pulling all that metadata. We're building that automated documentation for you every night for production and sandboxes. So we should be leveraging the APIs and all the power of computing to start to build that automated documentation for you. And clearly that's really important for that analysis. The second is documentation could come from third parties. It could come from SIs or from ISVs who have pre-built process maps as accelerators. They've already documented their master org, and they can simply lift and shift that documentation from their org into your org. So you've already got that documentation up to date. You implement a major managed package, maybe a big banking app or a pharmaceutical app. You should expect a lot of that documentation to come with it, so you're not having to document it. Work.com should be coming with a ton of documentation. We've built those accelerators that you can lift and shift and put straight into your org, and therefore that org is already pre-documented. The third area is this idea of linking. You've created requirements somewhere, or you've created user stories. You link those user stories to metadata. You create process maps and you create those linkages instantly without any extra effort. Right? 2 clicks. You can go to a user story, say, copy user story link, and then work your way around the metadata items going, yes, 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 done. All that linkage is done. Suddenly you're building a history there of the changes made to that metadata item. So again, we should think about that linkages as very limited effort, but a huge gain. And then the last piece is you need to create some more, you may need to create documentation about why you did things. Don't worry about necessarily how you did it. I can work that out. The systems are working that out for you. But what's really important was why you did it. What was the thinking behind? Now that may be documented in, I don't know, a user story requirement, but there may be other documentation. It's used in an integration. Why? Because we need to pump this data into Oracle Financials. Here is the specification, or here is a photograph of the whiteboard when where we drew out how the integration works. Here is a third-party document that describes how that integration works. Maybe it's just some quick notes. It only needs to be 1 or 2 lines. Just write down why you did it in the moment. The important word here is later. There is no later. If someone says, oh, I'll document that later, A, you've forgotten, B, you're on to the next thing. So the here is about capturing you in the moment. When you're in setup in that right panel, go and add that documentation. We've got the concept of a proposed item. So you are documenting, and let me just show you that. Here we are in this object. There's a custom object there that's been built, but we know we talked about vaccination. Well, there isn't a vaccination object that's been created yet, but I still want to start documenting it. So I said I've created an object, I've created some fields. I realize I want another new field, create proposed field. I can type it and say this is the vaccination ID. I give it an API name. I could, there we go. I could go and paste a story link because I've already got a story that's connected. If I hit attach rather than open, that would help. So very quickly, I've created a new proposed field. I'm about to attach the story link. So there's that stories now, that user stories attached to it. I could add some documentation. When that field gets created with that API name inside Salesforce, we'll instantly connect the two. So the ability to very quickly create documentation, as I said, there's a new field we want to go and create. It's linked to that user story. That's building up that institutional knowledge, which will help you the next time you come back and touch this. You're building up that history. We showed you here in the maybe one of the other objects that where were we? The employee object. All this has been built, but the history of how it has changed over time and why, we're building that history for you. So this documentation is really, really important, and you shouldn't underestimate the value the next time you come around and how much that will accelerate your implementations. So 3 quick takeaways and some resources for you. The first is that getting an ROI out of Salesforce is easy. And you might say, well, Ian, that's absolutely wrong. My definition of easy is it something that you can do? We're not trying to fuse germanium and silicon here. Could you do the things that I've just talked about? And the answer is obviously yes. It's achievable. It takes some discipline. It takes some you to understand the principles of shift left. But those principles they may be new to Salesforce, but they are known solutions outside the Salesforce ecosystem. These are proven principles. The last takeaway from this is clearly you can do this with spreadsheets and Google Docs, but that makes it an impossible task. You should be leveraging the tooling, whether it's Elements or other tools, leveraging the APIs that are available in Salesforce. Make the computer do the work for you. Use that computing horsepower. If you're trying to do this all manually, then I don't believe it's necessarily achievable, and the return on investment will not be nearly as great. So some resources for you. We've written down this is an article called The 3 Golden Rules, bit.ly golden ROI. That article goes into a bit more detail than I've talked about over the last half an hour, but more importantly, it starts to give you some of the metrics and the calculations, so you can build your own return on investment case based on your particular environment, the particular business drivers that you have. So in each of those 3 different areas, we've given you the key metrics and then how you would apply those in a calculation to come out with a return on investment. We also talked about the importance of process mapping. I spent very little time on it. It's hugely powerful. If you are still creating the odd flowchart, you need to get beyond that. Salesforce has created a business process mapping course. Again, if you're a Salesforce partner, you can access it through that link, which will take you to the partner learning camp. If you aren't a partner, then there's a summary of the course there at that bit.ly link. And finally, of course, very happy to talk to you about these principles or, of course, Elements. There's my email address, ian@elements.cloud. So again, thank you so much for joining me for this short webinar. Hopefully it's been useful, and I look forward to talking to you ideally in person, but I'm sure for the next 3 to 6 months we're going to be online. So thank you very much for joining us.